There is a specific moment when your reality begins to change. It is not when something happens outside. It is not when you receive a sign. It is not when someone confirms it. It is when you internally cross a point of no return. Most people live inside the same timeline for years because they never cross that point. They think about change. They desire change. They pray for change, but they do not activate change. Activating is different from desiring. And if you stay until the end, you will not only understand this process, you will feel exactly where this new line begins and how to sustain it. Because change does not happen at the end of the video. It happens when you decide not to return to the old version anymore. 1. The internal decision that opens the new timeline. Most people believe change requires time, but change requires rupture. And rupture does not happen when something improves on the outside. It happens when you stop identifying with the version that sustains the current scenario. The new timeline does not begin when opportunity appears. It begins when you decide that you no longer belong to the old pattern. Deciding is not desiring. Desire still contains doubt. Decision contains closure. While you think I want, you are still separated from it. When you think I am, you shift the axis, and that shift is vibrational. The vibration changes when identity changes. And identity changes when you stop allowing yourself to be the previous version. A real decision eliminates internal negotiation. You no longer evaluate whether it is possible. You do not consult the past to validate the future. You do not ask permission to grow. You choose. And that choice is not loud. It is silent, definitive, non-transferable. The moment you decide who you become, your field begins to reorganize perception, posture, and reaction. You begin to speak differently, to respond differently, to tolerate less of what does not match the new version. The old line loses support because it depended on your identification with it. And when you break identification, the line loses strength. This is the exact point where the new reality begins to be built, not in the future, now. 2. The cutoff point from the old reality. There is something that keeps any reality active. Repeated emotional attention. You are not living what you live only because of circumstances. You are living it because you remain energetically connected to the narrative that sustains it. Complaining keeps it alive. Over-explaining keeps it alive. Mentally reliving keeps it alive. Every time you revisit with emotion what you no longer want to live, you send a signal of continuity. The cut is not external. You do not need to change everything immediately. The first cut is mental. It is the moment when the old thought arises and you do not continue the conversation. It seems small, but it is not, because the old pattern depends on your active participation. Without your attention, it weakens. Without your emotion, it loses intensity. Without your repetition, it begins to dissolve. At first, the mind will try to pull you back. It will remind you of the mistake. It will suggest fear. It will question your decision. And the cutoff point is exactly there. You can continue feeding it, or you can interrupt it. Interrupting is not fighting. It is not giving it a stage. What you do not feed loses strength in your field. And when the old line begins to lose energy, a new space opens. That space is uncomfortable at first, because you were used to occupying your mind with the problem. But it is in that space that the new line begins to gain structure. 3. Feeling as a portal of transition. Thought directs. Feeling shifts. You can decide something mentally and still remain in the same reality if your predominant feeling does not change. The dominant emotion is what anchors you in the current scenario. If the base feeling is insecurity, you remain in the frequency of defense. If it is lack, you remain in the frequency of absence. If it is urgency, you remain in the frequency of scarcity. The transition happens when the feeling changes before the evidence. It is not forced enthusiasm. It is stability. The version that already lives the new line is not desperate. It is not asking for confirmation. It is not at war with time. It is centered. When you begin to sustain this centering, something profound happens. The nervous system relaxes. And when the nervous system relaxes, the field stops operating in protection. Protection blocks expansion. Stability allows expansion, sustaining for a few minutes the feeling compatible with the new reality already alters your vibrational signature, because your body begins to recognize it as safe, and when the body accepts it, the mind stops resisting. And when mind and body enter coherence, the line shifts. It is not emotional intensity that changes reality. It is emotional consistency. When decision and feeling align, the new line ceases to be intention. It becomes invisible movement, and the invisible begins to prepare the visible. 4. The identity that sustains the new future. You do not enter a new timeline carrying the same identity. That is impossible. The old line was sustained by a specific version of you, with certain beliefs, certain reactions, certain accepted limits. If that version remains active, reality has no reason to change. The most powerful question here is not, what do I want to live? It is, who do I need to stop being? Because the new line does not require extra effort. It requires abandoning the old identity. Maybe you need to stop being the person who always doubts at the last minute. Maybe you need to stop being the one who over-explains. Maybe you need to stop being the one who accepts less to avoid confrontation. Vibrational identity precedes materialization. You begin to notice the change when small things no longer match you. Old conversations bother you. Complaints lose their appeal. Certain attitudes no longer make sense. This is a sign of displacement. Small, daily behaviors consolidate this new identity. How you respond to criticism, how you position yourself in a negotiation, how you speak about your future, how you react to a delay. All of this confirms which line you are feeding. The new line does not require perfection. It requires coherence. When thought, emotion, and posture begin to point in the same direction, something powerful happens. The world begins to respond to the new version. And now I want you to do something that seals this transition. If you truly feel that you are crossing this internal point, comment something simple and definitive. I do not return, do not explain, do not detail, do not justify. Just that, I do not return. Because the new line begins when you decide the old one is no longer an option. And writing this is internally marking that you crossed the cutoff point. 5. Inspired action. The movement that consolidates the timeline. Here is where many activate the new line and then weaken it, because they confuse action with effort. Forced action is born from anxiety. It carries urgency. It tries to prove something. It wants to accelerate the result out of fear of losing. Inspired action is different. It is born from silent clarity. You do not act to convince the universe. You act because it makes sense for the version you decided to be. When identity changes, behavior must follow. If you decided to be someone who prospers, but you continue avoiding financial decisions out of fear, the old line receives reinforcement. If you decided to be someone confident, but you continue diminishing yourself in conversations, the field perceives incoherence. Inspired action consolidates the new frequency because it sends an unequivocal message to your nervous system. I am already operating at this level. And here is something profound. The brain believes what you repeatedly do more than what you occasionally think. So each small aligned action rewrites your internal pattern. It does not need to be grand. It can be a firm decision you would previously postpone. It can be setting a boundary you would previously tolerate. It can be investing time in something that builds your expansion. Small coherent movements generate internal evidence. And internal evidence eliminates vibrational doubt. Because doubt is born when there is a difference between speech and practice. When you act like someone who has already crossed the turning point, your field begins to stabilize in this new position. And something interesting happens. Action stops feeling heavy. It begins to feel natural. There is no drama. There is no excessive tension. There is direction. Life responds to those who move with calm conviction, not to those who run desperately. The new line strengthens when your attitudes confirm your decision, because manifestation is not waiting for a miracle. It is aligning movement with identity until reality has no other option but to follow. 6. Receiving. the permission that finalizes the process. Here is the most silent and most powerful stage. You can decide. You can cut the old narrative. You can adjust identity. You can act aligned. But if internally you still doubt when something begins to approach, you interrupt the flow. Receiving requires permission, and permission requires vibrational maturity. Many people ask for expansion, but when a greater opportunity appears, they feel fear. Fear of not sustaining it, fear of losing it later, fear of being judged, fear of changing too much. And that fear creates micro-contractions in the field, contraction blocks. Receiving is not only accepting the final result, it is accepting the transformation that comes with it. A new timeline brings new responsibilities, new decisions, new versions of you. And if you are still emotionally attached to the old identity, you will try to reduce what is arriving to fit the old pattern. Resistance is not shouting, "I don't want it." Sometimes it is quietly doubting. Tense expectation also blocks, constantly checking for signs, asking when, analyzing every detail. All of this communicates insecurity. Receiving is trusting that the field is already responding. It is planting and not digging up the seed to see if it is growing. It is continuing to live, act, and breathe like someone who has already crossed the turning point. Anticipatory gratitude stabilizes the vibration of possession, not as a mechanical ritual, but as an internal recognition that you have already shifted position. The less tension you sustain, the more fluidity enters. The new line does not need to be forced. It needs space, and space is created when you relax control and maintain conviction. When you allow without monitoring, something begins to move with lightness, and that lightness is the clearest sign that the line has already been activated. 7. Maintaining the new frequency, the commitment that makes it irreversible. Activating a new timeline is powerful, but sustaining it is what makes it inevitable. Creating is a moment. Maintaining is a positioning. Most people live cycles of excitement. They decide to change. They feel something strong. They act differently for a few days, then they relax internally and return to the old pattern, not because they failed, but because they did not sustain the chosen identity. Oscillating is human, but remaining is a conscious choice. The new timeline begins to consolidate when you stop treating the new state as a phase and start treating it as a standard. This means monitoring your internal dialogue without paranoia. It means noticing when the mind tries to reactivate the old narrative and not allowing it to take command. It means protecting your environment. Environments influence state. Conversations influence identity. Content influences frequency. If you activate a new line but continue mentally feeding the old one, the field enters conflict. Vibrational maintenance is silent discipline. It does not require emotional intensity. It requires consistency. Reviewing your intention daily maintains direction. A few minutes in the morning remembering who you decided to be. A few minutes at night confirming that you operated as that version. It is not a magical ritual. It is continuous alignment. What you sustain expands. If you sustain doubt, you expand doubt. If you sustain conviction, you expand evidence. The new timeline stabilizes when the new state stops feeling like effort and starts feeling normal. And here is the final point. Activation does not happen because you watched until here. It happens if, when you finish this video, you continue being the version you decided to be, without negotiating with the past, without asking for external confirmation, without emotionally going back. The old line has already lost strength. The new one is open. Now there is only one silent question. Do you remain? Because when you remain, reality has no choice but to follow.